2022, this coach won Coach of the Year. 3 years later, he got fired mid-season. The same pattern keeps happening across the NFL year after year after year, and I think I understand what's going on. I have a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology, which is pretty much the study of how people perform and behave at work. And something that I've noticed is that NFL teams are hiring head coaches like they're hiring coordinators. Now, let me show you what I mean with someone that I and Giants fans know all too well, Brian Daboll, the coach that came over from the Buffalo Bills that had the Bills offense on fire, looking like a video game. He gets to the Giants, wins his first game on a 2-point conversion, shows that he's not scared to go for it, goes to the playoffs his first year, wins Coach of the Year, and then that's when the real Brian Daboll showed up. It started with him taking play calling away from Mike Kafka, who right now has this Giants offense looking really good. And then we have the Wink Martindale incident where Wink ends up leaving because he doesn't want to work with Brian Daboll. So after that first Cinderella story year, Brian Daboll wins 6 games, then he wins 3 games, and then he's out of here the next year. But here's what no one's talking about. The Giants didn't hire a bad coach. He obviously was a great coach. He had Josh Allen playing well. He just hired a great offensive coordinator. And newsflash, being a head coach is a lot more than just calling plays. See, being an NFL head coach isn't just about doing what you did at your last job, except better. It's about being a CEO of a 200-person, billion-dollar organization, and every single week, you're being watched and criticized by millions of people on television. So in my field, we do a lot of what's called job analysis, which means pretty much studying someone's job, seeing what makes them great at it, seeing what makes them bad at it, looking for those traits and who you're gonna hire. Pretty simple, right? So coordinators, you're trying to get the best out of your group, you're trying to put up as many points, or you're trying to prevent as many points as possible. And then we look at head coach. Yes, you're trying to score as many points, you're trying to prevent as many points as possible, but also you have to make sure that the entire enterprise is integrated. You have to make sure that all units are working together, all units are complementing each other, and everything runs smoothly. So you probably shouldn't be on the sideline screaming while plays are happening, because you're probably not seeing what's going on the field. And the Giants have just gone through these coaches like toilet paper. They've gone through 4 or 5 coaches since Tom Coughlin, and teams get it wrong all the time. And sometimes teams turn to college coaches, and there have been some college coaches who have been successful, like Pete Carroll with the Seahawks, but there are a lot of college coaches that have flamed out. Urban Meyer lasted 13 games, and he almost literally destroyed the Jaguars facility. Like, I'm surprised the facility was still standing by the time that guy left. You look at guys like Chip Kelly. Started off pretty well, but then they figured him out and he couldn't adjust. Matt Rule couldn't really figure it out. Nick Saban couldn't really figure it out, went back to college, became the greatest college coach ever. But when you're hiring a coach from college, it's an entirely different game. Now, I'm going to give you a framework for if you're evaluating a college coach, if you're evaluating an NFL head coach, an NFL coordinator. This is what you're going to look at to say, this guy maybe has a good chance to be really good. This guy probably is going to crash and burn unless he's just an anomaly. So let's dive a little bit deeper, and by the end, I'm going to give you a checklist that you can use to pretty much grade any coaching candidate that you want to. So starting off with the 3 fits. Can the person do the job? Can the person coach? Can they literally coach in the NFL? Do they match the culture? They can be a great coach, but do they match that culture of where you are? And can they handle the pressure of whatever market you're in? Maybe some coaches can be great coaches and they can only be great coaches for small market teams. Or they can only be great coaches if they have an elite quarterback to take the pressure off of them. So what kind of fit are they for that specific situation? Their skill set, their actual coaching skill set, their organizational fit for how they fit in with the team, the city, etc. And then how do they fit in as far as dealing with the pressure of the media, of the fans? How do they fit in? But here's where it's going to get really specific. There are 5 competencies that separate the guys like Dan Campbell from guys like Urban Meyer in the NFL. So the first is obviously, can they adjust? The adjustment factor. Can they adjust mid-game? Can they adjust mid-season? Can they adjust after the first year when people figure them out? One head coach that's able to adjust, mostly because of his system is just so diverse, is Kyle Shanahan. If you come at Kyle Shanahan a certain way and you start to win, best believe there's going to be a different game plan in the second half. If Kyle Shanahan loses 5 or 6 players on defense, all of a sudden they figure out how to win like that. If he loses his starting quarterback, no problem. He'll win with the third string. So you have to be able to adjust in the NFL to be a great head coach. Guys like Kyle Shanahan, guys like Andy Reid, who has done it with 3 different quarterbacks, been a perennial playoff head coach with 3 different quarterbacks, 4 different quarterbacks. So he had Michael Vick for a little while, and he has just been able to adjust with all types of different personnel. He started off as a bombs away offense, and now after Patrick Mahomes went from chucking the ball 50 yards downfield almost every play, now he's gone back to the short passing game, getting some yak. So Andy Reid, Kyle Shanahan, in my opinion, 2 of the, at the very worst, top 5 best coaches in the NFL, both have this trait, and this is a trait that's invaluable. And of course, if you have a coach that does not adapt, that does not change, that does not fit their system to certain players, that cannot change their game plan, you're not going to be successful as a team. Now, next we have emotional intelligence, and people hear this a lot, and people kind of start to tune it out because you hear it so much. But emotional intelligence is extremely important, especially when you're coaching 53 and starting at the beginning of the offseason, 90 grown men who have bills, who have families. You're coaching 90 of these guys. You have to manage all these personalities. You have to figure out how to not show favorites. You have to figure out how to do all of that. And emotional intelligence is very important. One guy that stood out to me is DeMeco Ryans. He got there and immediately built a culture of accountability and a culture of respect. And he just has that Texans team just entirely in a different place mentally than they were before he got there. Trust and buy-in is invaluable for a head coach, because if your players don't trust you, if you're not bought into what you're doing, they're going to hesitate. They're not going to be confident out there on the field, and you're going to see a lot of mistakes and a lot of bad football. And then who has better intelligence than the guy that literally dealt with Antonio Brown for over a decade? Mike Tomlin just embodies emotional intelligence and is the quintessential players coach that doesn't really just give in to whatever the players do. He's able to manage crazy personalities like Antonio Brown, like Le'Veon Bell, like Ben Roethlisberger, crazy people that all have charges, people that all have real charges in real life. He's able to manage all of these players and get them under control. And then of course the poster child for no emotional intelligence is the man Urban Meyer, that literally kicked one of his players and said he was the head ball coach. But he's literally got Tim Tebow out there trying to play tight end. The team had lost respect for him. It was a toxic environment. He was disrespectful to the players. He was disrespectful to the coaches. He threw the coaches under the bus. He threw the players under the bus. And he absolutely was a train wreck. He's literally the poster child for what you do not want to do when hiring an NFL head coach. All right, so next thing for a head coach is something I've kind of already touched on, which is thinking at an enterprise level. The big difference between coaches and coordinators is that coaches are responsible for the whole unit. Literally the travel plan, how they go to London, what day they fly in. People don't think about these things that head coaches have to do. Literally on a 365 kind of basis, they're preparing for the next season. So it is a ton of work, and they have to have that CEO mindset. Now, again, another coach that really stands out here is Mike Tomlin. He's never called plays. He's not the guru that everybody wants on their team, that they're scared to lose an offensive or defensive coordinator. He is the quintessential CEO, and he's never called plays, and he hasn't had a losing season. John Harbaugh, again, a guy that fits the Ravens culture perfectly, a guy that really embodies leadership, that CEO role, who hopefully, maybe he leaves and comes to the Giants, but a guy that really embodies everything that you want in a CEO and a leader of the team. And again, not a guy who calls plays. He was a special teams coach, and he got there, and the Ravens have been great ever since. Now, of course, a coach who couldn't get that done is the former Giants head coach right after Tom Coughlin, Ben McAdoo, a guy that was so wrapped up in his play sheet, and the play sheet was literally like the size of a Denny's menu people used to joke about. He was so wrapped up in his play sheet that he could not possibly focus on every other thing that he had going on as a head coach. And then fourth, we have strategic influence. All head coaches have to manage above them, which is the GM, ownership. They have to manage to the side, which I really kind of call it the side, which is the media. Dealing with the media. If you can't do that, if you underestimate how important that is as a head coach, that can get you fired. And then also dealing with the players. Of course, the players are the biggest part. If you can't have the players bought in, as we talked about with D'Amico Ryans, if you can't get the players on board, if you can't influence them, if they're not ready to go to battle for you, you're never going to succeed as a head coach. Look at Andy Reid. He's on the sideline. Travis Kelce's losing it. He's going crazy. But at the end of the day, it all got right back under control. This is a guy that's literally loved by the players on his team and other teams. He's a guy that's loved by the media. And of course, how many Super Bowls this guy has won and games he's won, of course he's loved by the GM and ownership. Now, a bad example would be a guy like Adam Gase. Couldn't handle the media that well, kind of crashed and burned. The players never really respected him. He was a guy that got the job because he knew Peyton Manning. He coached Peyton Manning for a cup of coffee. So Adam Gase was not good in that role at all. And as we've seen, even with the New York Giants old coach Joe Judge, if you lose it in front of the media, it's kind of irreparable at that point. And then lastly, something that is huge to me is self-awareness and accountability, which kind of builds off that emotional intelligence. Bill Belichick is a guy that the media loves, going back to that influence. Bill Belichick is loved, or was loved by the media before all of the extra stuff, but was a guy that was loved by the media for disrespecting the media because he was so short with them, he was so cursed, and he just won, and he always won, and he stayed consistent and handled the media only a certain kind of way over and over and over again, and the media ended up loving him. He's a guy that always goes out there and says, it's on me, it's my fault, I need to be better, I have to fix everything. And, you know, bottom to the top, whether he wins, whether he loses, he takes all the responsibility. When he wins, his players did a great job, Tom did a great job. All of these things are consistent with Bill Belichick. I haven't seen his press conferences at UNC, but as the Patriots head coach, he stayed very consistent there. And you even saw Tom Brady modeling it. When everything went wrong, he said, I. When the team won, he said, we. So same thing with Bill Belichick. Urban Meyer, again, literally, in my opinion, one of the top 5 worst head coaching hires of all time in the NFL. Urban Meyer literally pointed the finger at everybody. Nothing was his fault. He had the perfect plan for the Jacksonville Jaguars, which again involved Tim Tebow. He had everything figured out. And it just didn't work for him. And since that didn't work for him, it wasn't anything he could have done better. It was just that these people just weren't ready to win. They weren't ready to step up to the plate like he did. And having that mentality, again, is not good in any leader. So now that we've gotten through those 5 competencies, I want to look at what teams actually do right now when they're going out to hire for a head coach. Of course, we know about the Rooney Rule, where there's 2 minority interviews, and we just start to see token interviews going on where guys that they're not interested in hiring at all get interviews. They sit down and they kind of talk for hours and hours and hours. A lot of X's and O's. A lot of, you know, what would you do this? What would you do there? And I'm sure they talk a little bit about leadership. And then once you spend that much time, and again, I'm a Giants fan, so I'm going to talk about the Giants. Joe Judge spent hours with John Mara and I think Dave Gettleman, and they just loved him. They loved him. They felt like he was the guy. They felt like his personality just stood out to people. And, you know, he was a natural born leader. And I think a lot of those qualities are there in Joe Judge. But it really turned into likability bias, which is the interview was interviewing somebody, they liked them, so hire them. And that's what we see all over the world. But in a perfect world where actual best practices of hiring are actually followed, you would actually hire the person who's the best for the job. So this is my opinion on what the NFL should be using in these head coaching interview processes. And a lot of what I'm going to say are already being used for players. Like, starting off, situational judgment test. That's basically where you put someone in a situation where you simulate what would happen at their job.
Coach, what do we do?
So, for instance, it's being done with quarterbacks. I've worked with people who do this. They're evaluating how quickly they can make a decision, if they get flustered, all those kinds of things. You know, if they think too much before making a decision. These things are being deployed on hiring players or drafting players or deciding whether to trade for a player or deciding how to develop one, but it's not being used to the best of my knowledge, for NFL head coaching hires, and this is something that absolutely should be used: situational judgment test. Now, the STAR method is something I'm pretty sure is probably being used with these head coaches, where they talk about a situation, what went through their head, what went wrong, what went right, and how they would change things to do better in the future. So hopefully this is something that's being, I would hope that this is being used in the NFL. You also have 360-degree feedback, which again is definitely used in the NFL. A lot of guys get hired just on their network of, oh, well, this guy speaks highly of this person, and this person on this team worked with them, and there's a lot of referral things that go on in the NFL. So 360 feedback is done well. And then also you have things like the Hogan assessment, which are going to do things like identify blind spots in their personality, to where at least when you hire the person, you can kind of figure out what might be an issue, and you can have experts to help coach that coach through some of these blind spots. Like maybe Brian Daboll needed an anger management coach.
You can't talk to the players like that, coach.
And then lastly, every single NFL team should be doing a culture assessment, which is essentially when people like me come into their organization and figure out what their culture is, what they want their culture to be, and then does that head coaching hire fit with that culture? Do they like that culture? Do they align with that culture? And do they fit with that city? Do they fit with the culture of the city? But again, some teams get it right. Some teams hire the right person, even when we think that they hired the wrong person. My favorite example in this situation is Dan Campbell, aka PC Principal. This guy was literally a laughingstock. He came in as the interim coach, didn't get the job, and then later on became the Lions head coach. Dan Campbell gave his opening speech, and he literally said, we're gonna bite the kneecaps off of people, and they're just saying like, oh, this is hilarious. This guy is nuts. He's going to be gone in a year. He's just a meathead. He's literally PC Principal as a head coach. No one's going to take this guy serious. He's just out there just saying whatever. And Dan Campbell has embodied every single thing he said in that opening speech, as far as standing up as a pillar of what Detroit stands for, as far as hardworking, blue collar, tough. I mean, literally, Dan Campbell is for tough. He stood up to everything he said in that speech, and his team respected it. His team literally feels like they need to go in and bite the kneecaps off of people. And one thing I've also noticed is that Dan Campbell does a really good job of creating kind of like a clan culture, which you want as a team. You want that team to feel like they're a tight-knit unit, they're a brotherhood, and that nobody is allowed in their space because they're just so tight-knit. Then you got DeMeco Ryans, another success story where it kind of was getting shaky a little bit with CJ Stroud. And CJ Stroud, we're still not seeing the original guy that we saw in this rookie season. But DeMeco Ryans has players raving about his communication, how good he is at developing individual relationships with players. And he really turned that defense around. That defense was a joke a couple of years ago, and he took them from the worst defense and took them to the playoffs his first year. And that defense, again, has been no joke since he's gotten there. The defense has gotten better and better and better. So again, me being a Giants fan, I'm going to apply this to this head coaching opening that we have. So who's the perfect fit for the New York Giants? So if you're not a Giants fan, just swap out everything I'm doing for the Giants with your specific team. Now, the first thing is environmental fit in New York City. You got to deal with the tabloids. You got to deal with the paper. You have to deal with WFAN. Talking about you every Monday morning. You have to answer to the media for all of these things. You have to deal with the tight-knit Mara family tradition. There's professionalism, there's tradition, and they want things done a certain way. Do you fit into that? Are you buttoned up enough? Can you sway them to be less buttoned up? What is your plan for that? So that is something you have to consider if you're becoming the head coach for the New York Giants. And then coming into this situation, how can this coach turn around a disastrous environment that's been basically the losingest team the last 10 years? If not the losingest, the second or third losingest team the last 10 years. Can you turn around literal crisis? And then we want to look at organizational needs. You have to make sure that the quarterback develops. You have to make sure that Jaxson Dart achieves his potential. You have to rebuild trust with these players, because there's been coach after coach after coach after coach. There's been loss after loss after loss. Defensive coordinators, offensive coordinators, head coaches, general managers all being fired. Some players are on their third or fourth head coach when you include interim guys. And then again, can you stand in front of this New York media? This is an absolute New York Giants organizational need. Can you stand in front of this media without melting down like how Joe Judge did? Because Joe Judge would have gotten another year if he had not gone in front of the media, melted down, and then quarterback sneaked from his own too, because he was just so rattled and so done mentally. All right, so hopefully you've been paying attention. Right here is a checklist for whatever head coaching candidate you have. From 0 to 4, give them a rating. And if they come in at 16 to 20, that's an elite fit. Like, you're doing really well. If they come in at 12 to 15, strong candidate, give them a look. 8 to 11 is risky. And, below 8, then, what are we talking about? So I'm going to run through this with Clint Kubiak, a guy that, of course, comes from that Shanahan tree, that comes from the Kubiak tree. He's a Seahawks offensive coordinator who's the hot name on the market right now. Let's run him through this checklist. So looking at environmental fit, I give him a 2 because you just don't know how he handles media pressure, how he could handle a city like New York City, but he does have that pedigree. So I split the middle and went with 2. Culture fit, he comes from the Seahawks, before that the Saints. I don't think those are necessarily similar organizations to the Giants. And because of that, I gave him a 2. And I think he's probably able to adopt a lot better than some people may be able to, because he's the son of one of the great all-time offensive minds. Then you look at track record. Does he outperform the talent that he has? Does he adapt? Does he adjust? I would say 100%. The guy adjusts mid-game. He comes out with exciting ways to exploit defenses and switches it up. And of course, he's getting a ton out of what he has as far as players go. So I'll give him a 4 out of 4 there. As far as his leadership, I've seen nothing but good quotes from players. So I gave him a 4 there. And then CEO ready. He's never been a head coach before. He's never led a defense before. So because of that, I gave him a 2. But he looks like he's doing a great job as the offensive coordinator of the Seahawks and last year the Saints. So that will put him at 14, which is a strong candidate, which I think is fair for a guy who's never been a head coach, who's pretty young, who's never been in a huge market. So now with that information, you can run any coach you want through this checklist. But let's look at a couple of other coaches. I'm not going to give them scores, but let's look at how they match up here. Jesse Minter is another hot name for head coach, but let's look at some of the things he's good at as far as being an optimal head coach. So of course, he's gotten great results. Took the Chargers defense from a bottom tier joke of a defense to a number 1 scoring defense. Doesn't have a lot of talent on that Chargers defense. Has worked under some really good names. Won at Michigan as a defensive coordinator. Is now in LA. So he's worked in 2 really sizable markets. And I would say his team usually, or his unit usually, rises to the occasion in these situations. Marcus Freeman, the guy that people are comparing to Mike Tomlin, a guy who's just a true leader of men. He's definitely that CEO type. He manages the media. He has to deal with donors. He has to deal with recruitment. He is literally like the tailor-made college coach that if someone would succeed at the NFL level, I would probably bet on Marcus Freeman to do it. When you look at the organization he's a part of, I think it lines up really well with the Giants. Notre Dame is a gold standard type of organization, and Marcus Freeman would not really have to adjust too much culturally coming to the New York Giants. But again, let's keep it in mind that only about 35% of college coaches succeed at the NFL level. So it is a big jump. And can his skill set, because let's be honest, in college, your skill set is being, of course, a head coach, but also how good are you at getting donors and how good are you at scouting and recruiting? Really, recruiting is the biggest thing. Is that skill set that he has going to translate over to the NFL? Is that same level of leadership going to translate over to the NFL? I think it can. I think it probably will, but that remains to be seen. And then finally, another name, Jeff Hafley, Packers defensive coordinator. He's a guy that made an instant impact in Green Bay. The Green Bay defense has taken off since he's gotten there, but a little bit of a yellow flag. I'm not going to call it a red flag because, people can take things out of context, but he did mention after leaving Boston College that he wanted to focus on coaching football. He didn't want to have to deal with being a CEO / fundraiser. So it just may mean he doesn't like the college game. He doesn't like playing the politics. Or it could just mean that he honestly likes focusing on being a coordinator, having his defense ready to go, having his team ready to go, and doesn't necessarily want to handle logistics of planning what day you're going to leave for a London trip or all those things, which you do need to do in the NFL. So he's going to have to decide if that's what he wants, but that's a little bit of a yellow flag. If he doesn't want to be a CEO, this isn't the job for him. And then lastly, him being a New Jersey native, he would clearly understand the area. He would understand what comes with being in New York / New Jersey as the Giants head coach. Look, the Giants are going to hire a head coach. The Titans are going to hire a coach. The Bengals will probably hire a head coach this offseason. And statistically, most of the head coaches that are going to get hired this year will fail. But it doesn't necessarily have to be this way. If teams would just start treating this process like they're hiring a NFL head coach instead of just vibes and gut feelings, if we could apply an actual process to this whole situation, just maybe teams might stop repeating the same mistakes.